Never asked a Shaila. Good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches Yoma Daf Yud, and we are starting 5 lines from the bottom on Daf Testament Beis. Yesterday we spoke about a brief story where we highlighted that Reish Lakish was in the Yarden, and Rabbi Bar Chana was there to pull him out of the Yarden, to give him a hand to help him get out of the Yarden. So 5 lines from the Gemara, from the bottom of Daf Testament Beis, the Gemara has a problem with that. Reish Lakish mimishtoi bahade Rabbi Bar Chana. Reish Lakish would talk to Rabbi Bar Chana. What is the Gemara talking about? Of course, why wouldn't they talk? They were both great Amoraim. So the assumption in the Meforshim is that Reish Lakish would only speak to people who were of the perfectly highest caliber. Says the Gemara, Reish Lakish mimishtoi bahade Rabbi Bar Chana, Uma Rebbe Elazar the Amora, de Mora de Ara de Israel Haba. Rebbe Elazar was the greatest of the great. He was the head of Eretz Yisrael. V'lo hava mishtoi Reish Lakish bahadeh. And when they were in public, Reish Lakish wouldn't even speak to Rebbe Elazar, who was mamish the gadol hador of Eretz Yisrael at the time. Demand the mishtoi Reish Lakish bahadeh v'shuk yuavole iska below sadeh. To anyone with whom Reish Lakish would have a conversation in public, they instantly earned public credibility, and their business would be booming instantly. So he was very careful with who he spoke to. So Bahadi Rabbi Bar Chana Mishtoi, Rabbi Bar Chana, who wasn't the Gadol Hador, big Talmud Chacham nevertheless, but he wasn't the Gadol Hador. So then says the Gemara, there's no way that doesn't make any sense. Reish Lakish didn't talk to everybody. In fact, he only spoke to very select people. If he didn't talk to Rebbe Elazar, he certainly wasn't going to talk in public to Rabbi Bar Chana. Says the Gemara, you're right. Of course that was the case. Amar Rav Papa Shadi Gavra Beinahu. There must be another person in the mix here. Oh, Reish Lakish Hava Uzeira. It might have been Reish Lakish who was in the water and Zeiri who was helping him. And the Meforshim here point out that Zeiri was an unquestionable tzaddik. Whether you looked within the Jewish people and without, everybody knew him to be a tzaddik. So that is a person that Reish Lakish would speak with. Oh, Rabbi Bar Chana Hava Rebbe Elazar. Or the person in the water and the person helping him wasn't Reish Lakish. Neither of them were Reish Lakish, and therefore problem solved. Kiyata lekame de Rav Yochanan. When this story came in front of Rav Yochanan, not the story we just read, but the story that we learned about 10 lines up yesterday, where we were told that those who live in Bavel were considered to be hated because, remember, im choma hinivna la tiras kasev, we said that for those luach orez, that those people were considered like wood, that they could rot. So it was an insult to them to say that the Babylonians were not such good people because they didn't come up from Ezra by the end of the Galus. It says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan, when this vort about the Babylonians came in front of Rav Yochanan, Amar Le, that isn't the real reason, and there should be a dollar here. The inami. Everyone knows that even in Beis Hamikdash Sheni, even if they all would have come up with Ezra, it wouldn't have changed anything. The Shechina wouldn't have dwelled in the second Beis Hamikdash either way. As the pasuk writes, Yafta Elokim liyefes v'yishkon bo'olei shem. What does this pasuk mean? How do we see from this pasuk that there was no Shechina to be sure in the second Beis Hamikdash? So as you turn to the top of Yud Amar Aleph, the Gemara explains, Afal gavda Yafta Elokim liyefes. Even though Yafta Elokim liyefes, we'll see in Rashi what this means. Ein Shechina shora ela be'oholei shem. So what does this drasha mean? So Rashi, the first one on the page, Dibur Hamatzil, Afal Pisha Yafta Elokim liyefes. So Rashi explains as follows. So Yafta Elokim liyefes. Yefes is a reference to Shezachu Parsiim Livnos Bayis Sheni Ein Shechina shora ela mikdash rishon. The people who built Bayis Sheni, comma. And Ein Shechina shora ela b'mikdash rishon shebana Shlomo shebami zaro shel shem. So when the pasuk says Yefes, it's a reference to Paras. It's a reference to the Persians. And when the pasuk says Shem, that is a reference to Shlomo. So if we look at the pasuk again, as quoted on the very bottom of Testament Beis, Yafta Elokim liyefes, the beauty of the Mikdash was built by Yefes, the descendants of Yefes, who were the Persians, the Yishkon ba'olei Shem, but the Shechina will only dwell by Shem, namely by those who are the descendants of Shem, that would be Shlomo. So that means only in the first Beis Hamikdash by Shlomo was there Hashras HaShechina, but not in the second Beis Hamikdash, which was built by the Persians. So it says the Gemara, how do you know that Yefes is related to Persians? Uparsoi minalan demi Yefes ka'asu. How do you know that that's the case? That when the pasuk says Yafta Elokim liyefes, that's a reference to Persians. It says the Gemara, Dechsiv, B'nai, I thought this was a little ironic. I did a bris this morning. Half the family was all Persians. I walked in there like, hello, Rabbi June. Like they have this very loving tune to them, and they're like a lot of very, very fond words that they use. So it was I just thought it was like pretty ironic. I just finished preparing for Daf Yomi. I walked in, the whole house is Persian. I'm like, kidding. I just learned about all the Persians who built the second base of Mikdash. Anyway, what?
They care?
I didn't reference it. A little awkward. Like, oh, your accent reminds me of Daf Yomi. The Persians when there was no holiness in the temple. So I decided to drop it. So they were Jewish persons. They were very Jewish persons. Yeah. Yeah. He was so excited to be a Sandik, the Sephardim. He would like his, Maktir Torah. I got very serious about it. It was beautiful. The Gemara writes, how do we know that Persians were descendants of Yefes? B'nei Yefes, Gomer, Magog, Umadai, V'Yavan, V'Tuval, Umeshech, V'Tiras. It says that all the children of Yefes, all of these names. And now let's do some drashas. All of the names that we are about to see are found in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and what today is probably even close to Asia. Says the Gemara as follows: Gomer ze Garmamia. The Gemara says Garmamia. That sounds quite similar to Garmania. And in fact, the Gra here right on the side writes, it's not Garmamia, it's Garmania, and it means Germany. And the language of Germany is from our Gemara. It's not something that was made up 500 years ago. We knew this thousands of years ago. This is old news. Magog is a Kandia, and Kandia, the Gemara says, is Crete, which is near Italy. Then there's a big gear to change in the Gemara. So let's look at the Hagos Habach and Os Katan Aleph. And he writes there, Madai Kimashma'o, Yavan Zu Macedonia, V'chein Ikar. Madai Zu Mashma'o, that's the city of Madai, or the country of Madai. And Yavan is Macedonia. And then let's continue with the next line. Toval Ze Beis Onaiki, which is a place close to Turkey. Meshech Zomusia, similar location as well. What does Tiras mean? That's a machlokas, the city of Tiras, who was the youngest child of Yefes. So Pligiba Rab Sima'e V'Rabbanan. It's a machlokas between Rav Sima and the rabbis. V'amrila, some say it was a different person, Rav Simon V'Rabbanan. Chadamar Zo Beis Triki, still a different place. This is called Thrace, which is some place that was near Greece. And Bechad Amar Pras, and Tani, Rabbi Yosef Tirazo Pras. So what's Pras? Pras is the youngest child of Yefes. So therefore we see that Pras is a descendant of Yefes. The Gemara is now going to go for the next 15, 20 lines about drashos that have different names of cities, different names of people, and what they actually mean. Savtacha v'ra'amav, Savta v'ra'amav v'savtacha. So the pasuk here reads that Savta v'savtacha, those are very similar words, says the Gemara, where about 10 lines down on Yud Amud Aleph says the Gemara as follows. Tani Rav Yosef, Sikistan, it's a village at Gaviyasa. There was an inner village, the Sikistan Bar Yasan. There was an outer village as well. It seems to appear that it was like concentric rings, where the inner city was like in a circle, and around it there was another city that lived in the ring around it. Bein chada lechada, between each of these concentric ring cities, mea parse, that's a very large distance. The hekefa alpha parse, and the circumference was 1,000 parse. You got to do the math. We know that circumference is always related to diameter. You have to sit down with a what do you call those things? A compass, and you got to sit there and you got to do the math and a ruler and figure out if all the math works. Which I can't remember which one is which. It's the things we don't use anymore. That's whatever it is. The pasuk reads, "Vatihi Reishis Mamlachto Bavel ve'erech ve'akad v'chalnei." So the pasuk speaks about different cities. Bavel Kemashma, that's a reference to Bavel. Arach ze Orichus, this is the city where Abraham was born, the city of Ur, as referenced here. Ve'akad ze Bashkar, which is a city that was in the northern part of Bavel. Kalnei is Nofer Ninfi, big machlokas as to what this means. It was at some distance away from Bavel. The next pasuk, Mina Aretz Ahi Yatza Ashur, what does that mean? Tani Rav Yosef Ashur Ze Silak. So what is Silak? So this is the city that was near the Tigris. Next pasuk, Vayiven es Ninve ves Rechovos here ves Kalach. So what are all of these locations? Ninve Kimashmo, as we know from the famous story of Yona. Rechovos Ir, what does that refer to? Ze Pras Demeshan. This is also by the very fertile grounds of the Tigris and the Euphrates. Kalach Ze Pras Deborsif, also in that same location. Ves Resen, Bein Ninve Ubein Kalach, Hi Ha'ir Hagdola. What does it mean? What are these different locations? Resen Ze Aktitzon. This is the Machlokas Rishonim actually. As to what city this is. Was it in Eretz Yisrael or was it part of Ashur? And what does the pasuk mean when it says Hi Ha'ir Hagdola? Which one was it referring to? Eni Yodeim Ninve Ha'ir Hagdola, Im Resen Ir Hagdola. So I don't know which one it is. Which one is considered the big city? Is it Ninve or is it the other city, which one is it? Resen. So it says the Gemara, Kshehu Omer, we're about halfway down. The Ninveh Ha'isir Gdola Leilukim Alech Shlosh Semim Have Omer Ninveh Hir Gdola. The Gemara concludes, based on the continuation of the psukim, that the bigger city was Ninveh. The pasuk continues last of the very short lines. V'shem Achimon Sheishai v'Talmai Yilidei Ha'anak, the famous psukim about the giants. Tana. So the Brisa explains as follows: Achimon miyuman shebe'achim. He was more talented than his brothers. He was better trained. Sheishai she'mesim es haaretz kishchisos. When he would walk, he was such a big guy. He would crush everything on the ground under him, like out of the movies. Just these huge, massive, big feet. Says the Gemara, Talmai. The name Talmai is from the word telem, which means a furrow. Well, like when you're doing plowing. Shemesim es haaretz telemim telemim. When he would step down, it would kick up dirt at the outsides of his feet, and he would create these furrows in the ground. Davaracher, another approach is no, their names were not specific to what you thought it meant in regards to different ways of approaching the ground. Davaracher, Achiman Bona Anas, he built the city of Anas. Sheshai Bona Alush, his brother built Alush, and Talmai Bona Talush. What does the pasuk mean when it says Yilidei Ha'anak, the children of the Anak? Says the Gemara, of course, Derech Mashal, Shemanik and Achama Bekomasan. They would wear as an adornment, they'd wear the sun as like a necklace. Bekomasan, when they were standing up tall, these people were not like the rest of us. We're not talking about a 7-footer. Doesn't say how tall they were, but they were so big that when the sun was shining, it looked like they had a little gem hanging on their chest. That's how big these people were. Of course, it's Derech Mashal. The Gemara is going to switch gears now. We're three lines into the first of the very long lines, end of the line. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amar Rabbi. Asida Rome Shetipo biad pras. In due time, the Romans will fall to the hands of the Persians. Shenemar lachein shimu atzas Hashem asher ya'atz el Edom umachshavosav asher chashav el yoshvei Timan im lo yischavun seirei hatzon. This seirei hatzon is a reference to Paras. Im lo yasim leim nevahem. So Maskif lo Rabba Barula, my mashma dai tzirei hatzon parasu. How do you know that when it says in the pasuk tzirei hatzon that they're going to be put into the hands of the Romans? How do you know that when it says tzirei hatzon it's talking about paras? The Gemara answers 2/3 of the way down. Ha'ayal asher ra'isa bal karnaim malchei madayu paras. So it says ha'ayal, a smaller animal, and it says madayu paras. So it seems to be clear that when it talks about these small animals, that it's referencing paras. It says the Gemara lav dafka. Not true. Maybe we could also say it's the Greeks. We see the seir is also a small animal, and there we see it's Yavan, so lav dafka. So says the Gemara, Hisalik Rav Chaviva bar Surmiki, when he was traveling, Amra Kame Deumer Rabban, and he said in front of someone, Amar Le, they said to him, what are you talking about? Mandelo Yoda Prushe Kroi. If you don't know how to read basic pshat and psukim, Mosiv Tiyuv Tel Rebbe, you're going to go to the Gadol Hador and start asking kashas on a pasuk. You know, sometimes when you're around a Gadol, you feel the need to ask a question, but you shouldn't ask a klutz kasha. You should be asking something that's a good kasha. So if you don't even know how to read the psukim, you're going to go and sit. I've done this before many times. When you ask a question, you think you really know what you're talking about, and you're clueless. They look at you like you're crazy. So he says, you can't even read the psukim. You're already asking all these questions. My tzirei hatzon. What does it mean, tzirei hatzon? Pashut, it's talking about Zutra de'achoi. It's the youngest of all of the children, youngest of all the children of Yefes, like we saw on the top of the page, the Tani Rav Yosef Tiraz Pras. So we know that Tzirei Hatzon is in fact a reference to Pras, and therefore Rome will conquer Persia. That's what the pasuk above was referencing when it said Tzirei Hatzon. And the Gemara here seems to agree, but based on something else. Amar Rabbi Bar Brachanam Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi Rabbi Eloi Asida Romish Tetipo Biad Pras. Rome will fall to the hands of the Persians, Kal v'chomer. And here's the logic that the Gemara employs. Uma mikdash rishon shebena'uhu b'nei Shem. The first Beis HaMikdash was built by the descendants of Shem, namely Shlomo HaMelech. And who destroyed it? V'hecherivuhu kasdim. And the people from Kasdim, which is a reference to the Babylonians, the Kasdim, because we just said, or Kasdim was a city in Babel. We saw that above the city of Erech was Arichus, which was the city of Ur, which was right near Babel. So the Kasdim were the ones who destroyed it. And Naflu Kasdim biyad Parsim. So then Mikdash Sheni Shebena'u Parsim v'charivu Romim. The Romans were the lowest of the pack. They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Eino din she'iplu Romim biyad Parsim. All the more so that the Romans should fall into the hands of the Persians. Amar Rav says, Asida Pras Shetipo biyad Romi, the other way, that the Persians are going to fall into the hands of the Romans. Says the Gemara, that's not right. Amrulei Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi the Rav. Banui biad sisuri, the people who built it, they did a good thing. And they're going to be put into the hands of those who destroyed it. That doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. It seems like it would make more sense that the people who built the mikdash should have more merit than the people who destroyed it. So Amar Lahu in, yes, it is in fact the case, but not because it's logical, but rather because Gzeras Melachu. In fact, the case that Paras, that the Persians will fall to the hands of the Romans because it's a Gzeras Melech, lav dafka, that it's necessarily logical. They did build the Beis HaMikdash, which was an asset that was good for them. Some say, yeah, they built it, but they weren't such tzaddikim. Amar Lahu inhu nami haka satre be'kanishta. They also did destroy shuls along the way. They weren't so perfect, the Persians. They did build a Beis HaMikdash, but they destroyed a lot of things along the way. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes exactly like this. I see the pras shetipo biad Romi, that the Persians will fall to the hands of the Romans for two reasons. One is because they did destroy some Batei Mikdash. And as well, there's a Gzeras HaMelech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a Gzera that those who built the second Beis HaMikdash would fall to the hands of those who will destroy it. And this Gzera also applies by us. Amar Yehuda Marab in Ben David Ba ad shetifshad Malchus Romi Harisha b'chol ha'olam kulo. Ben David is not going to show up until Rome. The evil Romans will run over the whole world for Tisha Chodashim Shenemar Lachein Yitneim Ad Eis Yolada Yalda. It should be the amount of time it takes to have a child. So it's going to take 9 months of their leadership, and then Ben David will come. So all of that is all the Torah Gzeras HaMelech, and all of that is the Agadata for tonight, explaining various psukim. Will Rome be in the hands of the Persians or vice versa? And as we started, to make sure that Reish Lakish, as we started tonight, would only speak to people who are of the mamish, the highest of caliber, because everyone who he spoke to was basically amazing, better than amazing. If Rabbi Bar Chana didn't make the cut, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. Reish Lakish would have no one to talk to in our culture. Says the Gemara, the two dots, a total shift in direction back to where we were, into a sugya of Hilchos Mezuzah. Hilchos Mezuzah. Says the Gemara as follows: Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us in a Tosefta. What does the Tosefta say? Kol halishkot shai b'mikdash lo hayu lehen mezuzah chutz milishkas parhedron. In all of the rooms in the Beis HaMikdash, there were no mezuzahs, with the exception of the parhedron. What room is the parhedron? That's what we've been talking about the whole Masechta, Kima. That the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur, or the Kohen who is going to do the service of the Sreifas HaParah, he would be put into the Lishkas Parhedron. So says the Gemara, there were no mezuzahs in the Beis HaMikdash. 5-6 lines from the bottom, Yudam Aleph, Chutz Milishkas Parhedron, Shahaya Ba Beis Dir Kohen Gadol. That was his room. That was his bedroom. So they put a mezuzah. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, no. That's not true. We know that the Kohanim slept in another room with the Beis HaMokad. There's no mezuzah there. People slept there all the time. What are you talking about? We know halacha l'maisa. This is our guideline. Anything that's a base dira, anything that's livable, we're obligated to put a mezuzah, whatever it is. So when we were doing mezuzahs in our houses, there were some openings that had like this. They had a tzuras hapetzach type of shape. Some openings went all the way up to the ceiling. The ones that went all the way up to the ceiling, you're missing the basic halachic parameter of a mashkof and shtei mezuzah. So there's putter. Let's say it's a closet that is less than dalet al dalet. So we have a closet in our house. It's bigger than dalet al dalet. It has a mezuzah on it. So what are you talking about? There were plenty of places in the mikdash that people, even if they didn't sleep in it, it was the size of a makom dira. It was the size of a base dira. It's very strange. So that's the what? The Gemara is going to discuss exactly what you're talking about, whether or not it has a din of a bias. But what'd you say?
You put in your offices.
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Well, we also have to make sure we're talking about a requirement midoraisa versus derabanan, which the Gemara is going to dig into. Maybe that some of the rooms that we put them in are not deraisa.
Like for aesthetics.
Could be. I don't know about aesthetics, but maybe it's the mitzvah derabanan. Yeah.
Do you sleep in your office? Do you have a bed?
Elolishkas parhedron. I'm just going to continue now. Elolishkas parhedron gzera haisa. So Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion, no, there was a special din derabanan that does require of a mezuzah in that room. It says the Gemara. Let's try to understand this. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. Why does he give pshat like that? That there's a special gzera derabanan by the lishkas parhedron. Amar Rabba, a correction in the Gemara. Kasavar Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is that a house that's only seasonal, a place that not that you don't live in, but a place that you can't live in because it's too cold or because it's too hot for part of the year. So that doesn't have the din of a bias. And therefore, because like Gerald was saying, because it doesn't have a din of a bias, so then there's no din of a mezuzah. So it says the Gemara as follows. That doesn't make any sense. Because v'haksibi keti veis hachoref al beis hakayitz. What do we see from the Gemara? That something that's about the choref is called a bias, and something that's about the kayitz is also called a bias. So the pasuk is explicit that it refers to places, even when the temperatures are extreme, we still refer to it as a bias. Amar le, no, beis choref or beis kayitz ikre. They're only called that because of where they live, but it's not a bias mamish, bias stama lo ikre. That can't be. That's not. It doesn't work that way. If it's not a house, it's not a bias as it relates to a mezuzah, unless it's a place that you can be in year round. Says the Gemara, asking seemingly out of left field, but we'll connect it back momentarily. Eis ve'abai, 2 lines from the bottom on Daf Yomi and Aleph. Eis ve'abai sukkah tachag b'chag. When a sukkah exists on the holiday of Sukkot, it's being used for halachic purposes. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev v'chachamim potrim. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that you are chayev. Chayev for what? Not mezuzah. What are we talking about here? Maasros. We know, let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi has 10 lines from the bottom of the Rashi, is 4/5 of the way down. Dibur Hamaslo Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev. And Rashi there says, what is he talking about the sukkah? What is he talking about? So it says Rashi, Le'inyan Meiser. What does that have to do with Meiser? The Kaim Alon, Ein HaTevel Mischayev B'Meiser Milechel Mimenu Achila Sarai. You're allowed to eat achila sarai from a collection of food. Ad sheyireh pnei habayis shenemar biyarti hakodesh min habayis. When is it that we have to stop eating achila sarai by meiser? That's when it sees pnei habayis. It sees the face of a house. What about a sukkah? Is a sukkah considered pnei habayis? That's the machlokas we have in our Gemara. 2 lines from the bottom. Sukkah sachag bechag. How would we treat a sukkah as it relates to Ro'o Pnei Habayis? Do we say that this fulfills the requirement of Biarti HaKodesh Min Habayis, that this is a bias, even though it's only functional for 7-8 days a year? Rabbi Yehuda says, you're Chai, V'chacham and Potrim, but Tani Allah, what does the Brisa say about this idea, about this sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev, not only with that, but Be'eruv B'mezuzah U'b'maiser, he says that you're Chayiv on all 3 of them, and it has to be that it's Deoraisa, because L'chitema Derabanan. If you want to say that this source is saying that the meiser is only going to be chai midrabanan, that doesn't make sense. I could argue conceptually that there's only a chiyuv midrabanan by the eruv and by the mezuzah. We learned the whole Maseches Eruvin many times. We only have a requirement midrabanan because of xerevs, because of takana. We just have a lot of concerns, a lot of considerations. However, Elamaiser, last line, last few words, Elamaiser, we don't have this concept of Durabanan by Maiser. Turning to the top of Yudam and Beis, why do we not have that? Because if you have a din Durabanan of Maiser, that means Midoraisa, it's not Chayv and Maiser. And if you mix that up with real Maiser, you're in big trouble. You could flip-flop them, and that which is really Chayv Midoraisa and Maiser, you'll end up not being Ma'aser. And vice versa, you have to be careful. So we don't do dinei derabanan, which means that it has to be a din d'oraisa. How then do we understand the shita of Rabbi Yehuda that the lishkas parhedron was only exer derabanan to have a mezuzah there for the kohen? Answers the Gemara, approach number 1. Second line of Yudam and Beis, Ela Amar Abaye B'Shiva. During the 7 days of what? Take a look at the first Rashi, that smaller collection of Rashis there on the inner margin. Ela Amar Abaye B'Shivas Yomim Shel Prisha. The 7 days where the Kohen was separated, lo palig Rabbi Yehuda. There is no argument there. Devadai mechayev dum yudasukah. So back in the Gemara, Amar Abai b'Shiva, during the 7 days of the Prisha of the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur, the Kuli Amalo Palig Mechayva. Everyone agrees that during those 7 days in the Lishkas Parhedron, there was absolutely a chiyuv to have a mezuzah. Nobody argues. Ki pligi b'shari motzah shana. How do we look at the other? Let's say there's 354 lunar days. Subtract 7. So for 347 other days of the year, was there a chiyuv of mezuzah by the Lishkas Parhedron? Says the Gemara. That's the machlokas that we have, that we saw in our Gemara. Rabbanan savre gazrinan sharia mosashana atuchiva. The Rabbanan were of the opinion that the din d'oraisa that everyone agrees to is for the 7 days of the preach of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippurim. Masha'in came the remaining days of the year. That was only a din d'Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda savar lo gazrinan. The other days of the year there is no gzera. Amar le Rava, no. We know that it's a din d'oraisa. We know that those 7 days are midoraisa, and nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda still seems to say that it's derabanan. That's what he said on the previous summit. So we still have to figure out Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, the Gemara gives a long-winded answer, which ends on the last line, which is where we will stop. Amar le Rava, Ela Amar Rava, we're a third of the way down, 6-7 lines down, Yudam and Beis. Ela Amar Rava b'shari mos hashana kule amalo pligi diptura. Everyone agrees that for 347 days out of the year, not including the 7 days of Prisha, the Kohen Gadol, Yom Kippurim, everyone agrees that there's no mitzvah of mezuzah midoraisa. Kipligi b'shiva. The machlokes is whether or not there's a mitzvah midoraisa or midirabanan during the actual 7 days of Prisha. The sukkah time aluchud, the lishka time aluchud, and there's different rationales within both sides of the Rishon, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. There's different rationales for sukkah as there would be for lishka. And let's go through each side, halfway down. Sukkah time aluchud. Here's the rationale for sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda l'taimei damar sukkah diraskeva ba'inan umechayva b'mezuzah. By sukkah, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that it's a din d'oraisa. So that's his shita that's reflected here on this Amud. The Rabbanan held that no, a sukkah is not a gzera d'oraisa. It is a gzera d'oraisa, but not as it relates to mezuzah. And because it's a dira sarai, there's no chiyuv for mezuzah. But by lishka, their shitas are flipped. The lishka, 6 lines from the bottom, the lishka time alachud. What's the reason why by a lishka we hold what we hold? So that's a machlokes for Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. 5 lines from the bottom, Rabbanan savrei dira bal korcha shma dira. That if it's a place that you're forced to live in, we still consider it to be a base dira. Rabbi Yehuda savar, no, dira bal korcha lo shma dira. When you're forced to live somewhere, it doesn't have the status of a base dira. We made it that we put a mezuzah there so that the Kohen didn't feel like he was locked up in a room, well, like a ball and chain. You're not locked up in a room it's not the worst thing in the world. You're the Kohen Gadol getting ready for Yom Kippurim. We're going to put a mezuzah there to make you feel like, as I mentioned, you're going to feel like a good person. So we had this whole conflict within Rabbi Yehuda. You said that really the mezuzah is derabanan, but you seem to say that sukkah is deraisa. Says the Gemara, split. Totally different svaras on each side. By mezuzah, he holds that it's really no chiyuv whatsoever. We just meet the rabbanan. We do require a mezuzah there so that he doesn't feel like he's chavish b'beis saser. But by sukkah, Hitaka does hold that it's a din doraita. So we'll stop right here on the bottom of Yudam and Beis. Tomorrow, Mir Hashem, we'll learn Daf Yud Aleph and Yud Beis and Aleph. Tomorrow's Thursday?
Yeah.
Okay. Wishing you all a beautiful night.